Hello and welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Feeding Pets Like Family, Challenges in Emerging Pet Food Trends. This webinar is sponsored by SGS and presented by Pet Food Industry. My name is Debbie Phillips Donaldson. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Pet Food Industry, and I will be your moderator today. Before we start, I have a few announcements. First, there will be a question and answer segment at the end of our presentation today. Please feel free to submit your questions in the question window in the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We will answer as many as we can within the time allowed. I would like to note this webinar is being recorded and will be available to view as an on-demand video starting tomorrow. To register for upcoming webinars, view that on-demand video, or see on-demand webinars on related topics, please visit petfoodindustry.com/webinars. Courtesy of our sponsor, we have a handout available to download today. You can locate the PDF in the handout window of your GoToWebinar control panel, again on the right-hand side of your screen. And please note this is available to download only during this live broadcast. Later in today's presentation, we will have a poll question for you to please answer. We will give you plenty of time to respond, and our sponsor and speakers look forward to your responses. And finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, there will be a brief survey. We would greatly appreciate it if you took a few minutes to fill that out. Our sponsor today is SGS. SGS is the world's leading testing, inspection, and certification company. Their brand promise, when you need to be sure, underscores their commitment to trust, integrity, and reliability. SGS proudly delivers expert services through the SGS name and trusted specialized brands, including SGS Nutrisource, over a network of 2,500 laboratories across 115 countries. For more information on products and services offered by SGS, please visit www.sgs.com. Our speakers today are Jennifer Lott, Jessica Dysel, and Katie Valm. Jennifer Lott is a Technical Development Director for Food at SGS North America, and she specializes in food and product safety management systems with particular expertise in all things associated with certification, including training and project management. Jessica Dysel is a microbiologist who has spent her career working with food and pet food companies to understand test methods, developing research projects, and evaluating novel foods and processes for microbiological risk. She joined House Richter in 2025. Katie Valm is Program Manager, Non-Clinical and Animal Health Services with SGS Nutrisource GRAS Associates. She supports clients with GRAS and other regulatory filings, as well as safety and efficacy studies, and brings over 7 years of experience in non-clinical research and education in business, zoology, and veterinary medicine. Katie is going to start us off this morning. So Katie, please go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you, Debbie. We're excited to bring this discussion to you today. Jess, Jennifer, and I have had great conversations over the last couple of months as we planned this webinar, and I hope we can capture that for you today. To start, we're going to talk about why this topic is important. The title, Feeding Pets Like Family, was chosen because it reflected our personal and professional experiences with pet food. Then, to set the stage for our main discussion, we touch on current trends and consumer choices that influence diets for companion animals. With innovation comes risk, and we will discuss some considerations for novel ingredients. Lastly, we want to discuss the term quality and finally open the floor to questions. As Debbie mentioned, there is a dedicated monitored question field, so please enter your questions as we go. So why is this important? Pets are family. Depending on your preferences, they may spend more time in your bed than you do. They eat beside you in the kitchen. They may be your child's best friend, and they accompany us on many of life's journeys. We know that the food they eat is important for their health, but it can also have direct implications in our living spaces, such as the differences between feeding a kibble versus a raw diet. For the purposes of this talk, we are generally considering food for dogs and cats, but as someone who has owned many animals in my life, I do want to acknowledge the wide array of pets that share our lives. Considering dogs and cats specifically, one survey of US pet owners identified health and nutrition, quality, ingredients, and freshness as the top factors when choosing a pet food. This survey also indicated a high trust in veterinary staff recommendations and pet owners' willingness to put more effort into their pets' nutritional needs than their own. I started my career in animal health as a veterinary technician. I understand the care and concern that people have for their animals, and also the challenges faced by both pet parents and vet staff in keeping up to date with best practices. I also spent several years working in a boutique pet store offering a variety of premium pet food brands. In that time, the question that everybody asked when they came in, what's the best food for my pet? In my opinion, it's a question without a single answer, and that's demonstrated by the wide variety of very successful pet food types and brands. In today's talk, we hope to give you some food for thought regarding innovations in this space that continue to meet pet owners' expectations. To start, let's take a look at some of the trends happening in pet food. Again, this will focus on food for dogs and cats. There we go. One more slide, here we go. So in April, our SGS coworkers attended both the National Animal Supplement Council Annual Conference and Pet Food Forum. As part of our display at Pet Food Forum and in a follow-up LinkedIn post, we asked for input on what the next popular pet food protein source will be. If you had a chance to visit our booth at Pet Food Forum, you might have contributed to our sticker poll as seen in the image here. Now, this is one of the things I want to put to the audience. If you think we missed an opportunity to ask about something different, please feel free to post that in the chat for the webinar today, and we will try to touch on it in a little bit. Plant, insect, and microbial proteins are all expanding, especially as technology has made mass-scale production more feasible. The general feedback that we received in our poll is that insect protein seems most likely to take off. And I do think this is reflected somewhat as AAFCO just recently approved mealworm meal and crickets for use in adult dog food. When we talk about emerging trends in pet food, I think it's important to first look at core trends to be able to put perspective on what a novel trend is. The Institute for Feed Education and Research just released their most recent commission report on pet food ingredient use in the US. The key takeaways that I noted are that 44% of ingredients used in pet food are upcycled, meaning they're sourced from unused materials, or they may be sourced from unused materials in the human food chain. And the core ingredients have stayed relatively stable over time. Chicken, beef, marine products, and grains are the top ingredients by weight, and store-bought dry food is the main food form for both dogs and cats. This speaks to the need for convenience being a key driver for pet owners. And on this background, novel ingredients can be used to offer pet parents alternatives, for example, in the protein source of the pet food. Let's see. There we go. Okay. For the AAFCO nutrient requirements, minimum protein for adult dogs is around 18% dry matter, and cats is around 26% dry matter. And this, of course, is higher for growth and development in both species. Given that protein sources are often other animals, it is understandable that protein has had notable advancements in the options for pet parents. Cultured meat has garnered interest for both human and animal consumption, and recently the first cultured pet food was made available for sale in the UK. Cultured meats, also called cultured animal cells, in the US have a dedicated regulatory review pathway for use in human foods. And although scalability of the technology has been one of the major challenges for this industry, and there have been some high-profile wins and failures, it is reasonable to expect that the nutrition profile for this ingredient would be closely aligned with naturally produced animal cells. Cultured meats are produced in a chemical media similar to other cellular fermentation products, but they do have unique safety considerations that we'll discuss in our main panel. On the other hand, insect proteins, as I've mentioned, are fitting within existing regulations. I mentioned earlier that there are several insect-based ingredients for foods for cats and dogs and other animals that are now in the AAFCO official publication, including black soldier fly larvae, crickets, and mealworms. An additional consideration that could be important to pet parents is that insect protein may contribute to reduced ecological footprint. Like other emerging technologies, there have been public ups and downs for the companies involved in producing insects for consumption on a mass scale, but generally, pet owners are open to the idea. I actually recently evaluated a cricket-based diet for my own allergy-prone dog, and it didn't ultimately come out on top, but I appreciate having that option for a dog who has a progressively shrinking list of protein sources that work for him. Cultured microbial proteins are not new per se, but the range of species that are being used is increasing. The AAFCO definition for dried yeast as a protein source dates back to 1955, while the Center for Veterinary Medicine GRAS submission list includes several submissions over the last 5 years for either new microbial species or new target animal consumers. This brings up an important point that we will discuss further. Safety of an ingredient is specific to the target consumer. Plant-based proteins are subject to similar changes in use. Although some plant proteins have been used in animal feed for decades, technological innovations that allow for the selective concentration of certain constituents or the refinement of different waste products from the human food industry mean that plant-based protein options are expanding. Changes to the preferences of the pet parent can also put weight behind use of these ingredients. However, increased use of plant ingredients in the diet of carnivores is not without controversy. Vegan cat diets and grain-free diets with lentils are examples of current trends that have caused discussion. And we aren't going to evaluate the science on those formulations today, but we will talk about nutrition requirements from a high level later on. Proteins are not the only food type or trend moving into the pet space. More people are using supplements and may look for the same health benefits for their pets in either supplement form or as part of their pet's regular diet. The challenge is that not all substances have the required evidence supporting use in pets, and science-based support for use of ingredients is also a key driver for pet parents. Probiotics are now commonplace in pet diets, and while there's a reasonable list of direct-fed microbials listed by AAFCO, proprietary strains are becoming more common. A range of botanicals and their extracts are being added to pet foods. We'll have a discussion on some recent warning letters regarding botanicals later on in the presentation, as well as mushrooms and isolates from other common food ingredients. The key challenge with any novel ingredient is building the required evidence of safety in the target species. The research is exciting, and our pets will benefit from good quality studies that can help us understand the risks and benefits of new foods. So as I explored the novel ingredients, I referred to several trends on behalf of the pet parent. We have summarized some of these trends over the next few slides, again, to help put into context the risks and challenges of innovation in pet diets. The health and nutrition focus shows itself through consumer preferences for natural ingredients, although the definition and interpretation of natural has considerable variation. Functional health, and I would say originally highlighted by the use of glucosamine and chondroitin for joint health, but now extending to skin health, digestion, and immune support, is an important consideration for many pet parents. Raw pet diets are becoming more mainstream, with groups dedicated to science-based education on proper formulation and advances in processing to minimize key risks such as bacterial contamination, and I know we have more of a conversation about that coming. There are some who argue that raw diets are healthier for cats and dogs, and I just want to revisit the why pet food safety is important. For a pet parent who believes that raw is healthier than kibble, but has to take into consideration the risks of a raw diet, maybe there's small children in the house or immunocompromised family members, a fresh cooked diet may be a more tolerable option. And although I can't pinpoint it exactly, I can remember when the only thing in a pet store, fridge or freezer, was fish feed or rodents for the reptiles. And now most mainstream pet stores have like a grocery store sized fridge and freezers to accommodate the range of fresh and raw diets available. Now, just a quick note on this. I'm based in Canada, and my observations are on our Canadian pet stores. And so I wanted to open that up for people listening in on the webinar. If you've had a different experience, you're based in other parts of the world, you know, are you seeing the same changes on the prevalence of raw and fresh diets? The next consumer trend that we would talk about is the customization and experience. So customized diets used to be for large breed, small breed, young animals, old animals, but now breed specific needs. There's direct consumer DNA and microbiome testing to determine a pet specific needs, and this advances the consumer perception of the uniqueness of their pet. Specific health considerations such as ingredient intolerances or allergies, urinary tract issues, and others are also addressed in non-veterinary diet formulations. We won't be talking about veterinary prescription diets as they have separate considerations. But I do want to talk about palatability because this is something I find very interesting. I know my dog, palatability is synonymous with goes in my mouth. That's basically it. But there are several studies that point out the equal, if not greater, perception of palatability is on behalf of the pet parent and not the animal consuming the food. An odor which could be appealing to a dog or a cat may turn the owner off buying that particular food. When I worked as a veterinary technician, the non-prescription diet we had on the shelf had a lot come through that had small fish bones visible. And although it was determined that there was no actual safety concern, the perception of risk by the owners meant that a large number of these bags were returned. We've already touched on several alternative proteins, but it's worth reiterating that often the protein choice may be based on factors other than nutrition. A focus on sustainability includes the ingredient sourcing. The pet food industry already incorporates a large number of upcycled ingredients, and with advances in technology, will continue to look for ways to divert food waste into usable products. Lastly, I'd want to touch on how premiumization through selection of unique ingredients and smaller boutique pet food brands appeals to pet parents. Subscription services, which add additional considerations for pet food safety during the delivery process, will also be discussed. All right. I hope I've been able to set the stage for our discussion on how new ingredients and pet food trends need to be evaluated in the light of risks associated on an ingredient and food form basis. Jess and Jennifer, I'm excited to talk to you about your thoughts on these advances. We've generally grouped the topics under formulation risks, product safety and stability risks, consumer and pet acceptance risks, and regulatory and labeling risks. So let's have a chat. So I think we're going to start here with formulation risks. Jess, Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you if you have some initial thoughts. Or I do have some points here as well.
I mean, I certainly have thoughts. I think everyone who has ever had a pet has thoughts and feelings about this topic, and it's really great to be able to have a discussion today about some of these things. I'll start with the things that are close to my heart as a microbiologist, which is primarily toxins. And when I think of toxins, to me, it's not mysterious chemicals that I don't know what they are, but they're biological products made by uncontrolled microbial growth. So things that may be commonly aware, or that people might have an awareness of, such as aflatoxin B1 in corn, which is a big ingredient in dried pet foods. But we may start seeing some of that occur if there's other meal sources used, for example, for insect protein that may accumulate throughout the food chain. So awareness of things like that. Also, if we're talking about using upcycled or food waste products, there's a potential risk for other toxins such as staphylotoxin. There's Bacillus cereus can create toxins, and some of those may be inactivated through various processes that the foods go through, but some of them may not. So those are things that are potential risks with new products, new ingredients, and new ways of creating foods.
I think you're on mute, Jen.
I was just going to comment that with cross contact with allergens, when you think about pet food manufacturing, because they're not held accountable to 21 CFR 117 for food manufacturing, sometimes the management of allergens is not as stringent as we would see in human foods, and there are risks associated with that.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I have an allergy-prone dog, and that's been one of the things where, I can read an ingredient list and, he still has a reaction, and then I have to run through, like, is this a new thing? Is it potential with a cross-contamination? And I mentioned about the cricket diet, and one of the things that I think is really interesting, I'm going to touch on that nutrient imbalances part, is anytime you have a new ingredient that could form maybe a large portion of a diet, you have to start thinking about, how complete is that nutrition? How does it need to be balanced off? And I don't know the specifics with insects exactly. I'm just using that as an example. I understand that they're showing to be a very good nutritious source for our dogs and cats, but that's the part of the research that needs to be done, is how does all of that fit together? And on that cross-contamination piece as well, when you have new ingredients that have a new form, they might interact with the equipment differently. And I believe there's actually a webinar that was a few weeks ago that talked about that specifically, but you know, just to comment on that with the formulation risks as well.
On the allergen piece, since we're talking about, you know, our pets are our family, I think there's also that human risk, right? Which is if you're bringing in specific proteins for an animal that may have concerns, are there risks with the people in your house with those? So, you know, clear labeling is going to be important as to protein sources. And if manufacturers know that there's potential allergens concerns, I think that it would be a great idea for them to call that out, you know, in the marketing or the branding, so that people can bring them into their home with a sense of education and caution.
Great. Let's hop over to the next one. We can always come back if another thought comes up in that on that topic. So yeah, product safety and stability risks. So Jess, I feel like this one's kind of right up your alley.
Yeah, this slide has me all over it. And we'll talk more about how a manufacturer of a pet food may evaluate risk, control risks later, but let's have kind of a general discussion about contamination and shelf life. So traditionally, a lot of pet foods have been preserved by low moisture content. So these dry kibble diets, very stable. There's not a lot that will change, potentially some fat oxidation with some of the coatings and the ingredients, but microbes aren't going to grow in those products. But as we look at newer food matrices that are coming onto the market, so that have higher water contents, the potential for spoilage increases, because all of a sudden you're providing an environment where organisms can grow, whether they're being added on purpose, so if they're a probiotic, or if they're sort of post-process contamination, and that may be something as innocuous as mold spores in the air. That's why a lot of ready-to-eat, fresh cooked products will have an expiration date that's very short after opening the package. Part of that is to limit the ability for these microbes that might be introduced through someone scooping out of a package or just incidental contamination from growing in the product. So if we're talking about control in order to optimize contamination or reduce shelf life, we're looking at things like, is there a process, whether that's a thermal process or an HPP process? Are there things that you can do to the formulation, like reduce water or increase antimicrobial benefits through using a preservative system, for example? But I do understand that those often carry consumer risks, even though there's a benefit to the stability of the product.
Right. And we also in our initial discussions talked about you know, the safety and stability, the limited ingredient availability. So with novel ingredients, you may have to adjust your manufacturing process. And then, as I mentioned, some of the novel proteins, you know, there have been public wins, and then sometimes these companies have some issues. And so you may have to set up a process, and then that ingredient is no longer available. So I know that we talked about that earlier in our discussions as well. Right.
I wanted to touch on supply chain real quick, which is there's not only the supply chain for the ingredients, but then there's also the supply chain piece of getting the food to the customer and to the end pet consumer, right? And as the ability of direct to consumer sales really changes in that model, it's no longer you're just going to the store and you're picking up food. Now you can order it online, including things like fresh, frozen products. those bring with them some challenges in maintaining the quality, the freshness, and the safety of those. There's also some great options for temperature monitoring so that the consumer can know when they pick up that box off their porch at the end of the day that the temperature and the quality of that product has been maintained. So I think that that's an important piece of the supply chain. It's really starting ingredients to, your pet enjoying the meal.
It does put some of the more of the responsibility on the consumer then. If you have your delivery of your pet food and it's a fresh cooked diet or it's a raw diet and it's sat out for a couple of hours, what do? You're going to have to make that choice.
Yeah, that's a piece of education that has to be done, and then the manufacturer needs to, I guess, have some sort of either program in response for when that doesn't happen, because that will inevitably lead to consumer complaints that they'll need to deal with.
Right, it takes the last mile away from just human food and puts it in other areas.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to our next topic. Now, consumer and pet acceptance risk. So I talked about this a little bit in terms of palatability and how so much more of that is on the pet parent's opinion of that food. And something as simple as the appearance of a kibble, the smell, that may influence how well a diet is received. I was actually just leading into this webinar, I was doing some research on, again, the insect proteins, what is being done to understand the palatability. And there are a few published studies out there that are looking at differences in this, because of course you wouldn't want to have an ingredient that then puts the animal off or puts the person off. I at one point in my life did raise crickets, and I know they have a very unique smell. And I noticed that in the smell for human food, but I haven't. I'll have to find some cricket pet food and see if it still has that same smell. Yeah, Jess and Jen, did you have any comments on this one?
I mean, I have a little bit of experience with black soldier fly larvae from a laboratory testing experience. And I think one of the common pieces of feedback that we got from all of our laboratory technicians was that they were really surprised and somewhat enjoyed the peanut butter-like smell that they had.
Right, and my only experience with this is when our cat was diagnosed with kidney issues, we had to go from a dry kibble to a wet food, and she just loved it.
Yeah, that's true. It could go the other way, right? The increase the palatability. All right, and regulatory and labeling risks. Now, I alluded to some warning letters that I actually was just made aware of right now, or just this morning, but CBD as a botanical extract was included in some pet foods. And the FDA has come back and said, this is adulterated. So although this is maybe a bit of an extreme example, but novel ingredients need to meet the requirements. And the legality of it is for regulatory, an ingredient should be AAFCO defined. It should be an approved food additive, color additive, or subject to a GRAS conclusion. And then also when you have this novel ingredient, I know in our space, we often get companies that are hoping to make statements that are outside the allowable claims specific for food, which really needs to be linked to the nutrition of that particular ingredient. So there are risks when you're introducing a new ingredient, and we've seen it where it's the manufacturer has purchased, like the pet food manufacturer has purchased from an ingredient supplier, and then they have the responsibility of building out the safety for that particular ingredient to be able to use it. So it's just something to have in consideration when you're looking at a new ingredient to add to your pet food, is just to do that background check. Does it have an existing regulatory positioning? How can you list it on your label? Is that going to meet the goals that you have for that particular ingredient? So Jess and Jen, I'd open up to you if you have any other comments on that. Otherwise,
You know, Katie, typically when there is a regulatory or labeling issue, I call you.
yep, and that's perfectly fine. I'm happy to take your call anytime. All right, well, I think this moves us over. There we go. So risk management essentials. I think this is where I turn it over to Jess.
Yes. I think you're still in charge of the slides though. So
Yeah, there we go.
I'm going to start off by saying that some of this is going to sound a little pessimistic, but I don't mean it to be. I'm generally very optimistic that there's often technologies about there for reducing risks, for detecting them. But I do want to be very clear that as I surveyed pet foods, a lot of the marketing that I was seeing was around human grade ingredients. And as a microbiologist, I want to reiterate that human grade ingredients and meat in particular, although plants are no different really, does not mean that they're free from risk. We work with a variety of food manufacturers, both pet food and human foods, and there's a tremendous amount of risk mitigation and process control involved with delivering ready-to-eat products to humans. And I believe that the same should be applicable to pet food. So it's great that there's parallels with both of those. So just a quick survey of beef operations looking at salmonella. You can see that there's positive results from all the years that they sampled. There's been salmonella outbreaks associated with beef, both ground, intact, ready to eat, and others. The reason that I picked beef and salmonella is I think that there's a big market out there for beef-based pet foods. Obviously, limited ingredient, and these novel pet foods are different, but I think with protein being a star ingredient in a lot of things, beef is one. And salmonella continues to be the #1 microbial driver of pet food recalls. In part, it is because it's uniquely tolerant of a lot of conditions that other bacterial pathogens, such as Listeria monocytogenes and E. coli 0157, aren't. And that could be drying, that could be other insults that might happen. But it's also makes it uniquely susceptible to lingering in your processing environment and being a driver of post-process contamination. So next slide, please. So as I said, I used to work in a lab and we worked with black soldier fly larvae. I think it's a really cool idea, which is basically taking soybean meal or food waste scraps, growing insects that have a short lifespan and a high protein content, and being able to turn those into something that feeds pets and people possibly, if they're delicious. But I think it's important to understand that the inputs that feed into this protein source can bring risk associated with it. So I mentioned briefly aflatoxins or other bacterial toxins. I think that there's concerns about the quality of that food. We obviously don't want spoiled product being an ingredient, even if it's, you know, a couple steps back in the supply chain. So it's important to understand the process involved in producing these novel proteins. Do those processes support potential pathogen or toxin production? And then how is that supplier of that protein ingredient eliminating or eliminating risk? So what preventative controls do they have? And that could be something as simple as the larvae are baked, the pea protein is spray dried. Do they have validations to support multiple logarithmic reductions of pathogens? And then really importantly is, does the supplier have adequate environmental control? So how do they know that they're not contaminating that product post-process? Next slide. So a lot of people, I think, turn to microbial testing in order to sort of gather data about risk and ensure that their product is safe to consumers. I think that there's a lot of things to consider when you're developing microbiological testing program for any sort of food. I really encourage people to seek out microbiological expertise, whether that's a consulting group, whether that's your laboratory that's doing the testing. And there's going to be some considerations that you need to take into that plan while you're developing it. So the first one is, are you going to spend your money on testing your ingredients or your finished product, or how do you balance those both out, depending on what processes you have in place to reduce those risks? How do you determine your sample size, your frequency across lots? How do you even know what your pathogens are concerned are? It may vary depending on what your background ingredients are and what the processes that went into them are. And then are there other indicators of quality? Because obviously it's not just safety, but quality is important as well. One of the things that we've seen in the pet food testing realm is that the physiological state of the target can make a really big difference into whether you can find it in the testing or not. So with dried pet foods, if you're looking for salmonella, for example, the cells can be stressed, they can be heat injured, they can be slow to resuscitate during testing. And that makes it harder to find them reliably and with confidence. The other thing that we've seen is the inclusion of probiotics or other fermented type products that are bringing with them a large load of microbes. Those can actually suppress the detection of pathogens if they're there, because there's so many present that they're keeping the numbers down. So those are two big things that are worth considering when you're picking test methods for your products. The great news is, if you understand how that food is being put together, even if there aren't necessarily well-validated, highly publicized methods for that particular novel food, you may be able to find similar types of food within the human food realm that are very similar, that will give you confidence in selecting an appropriate methodology. I do think it's worth validating any testing that you're doing with your food matrix. Next slide. So let's talk real briefly on validation of methods. So we have matrix type. So as the field of pet food diversifies, the diets are changing dramatically. So the protein sources, the flavorings, the biological actives, who knows, the nootropics that they're going to put in your dog food next, right? All of those things could have a potential influence on the way that tests work, because at the heart of them, you need to grow up the organism, and then there's a chemical reaction involved with finding it. We've seen in the lab that there are some ingredients, whether it's a palatant that's put on the outside of a kibble, or a colorant, or a nutritional amendment, that can sometimes interfere with the detection of pathogens. So it's really important to do the work with the testing laboratory to ensure that if it's there by spiking samples, that you can actually recover it out of the product type. And then doing that work on the sample size that you're actually going to test. So whether that's 25 grams or 125 or 375, making sure that the data that you're generating is relevant to the testing that you're actually going to do. And then the last piece is indicator testing for process control. If you are implementing a process, whether that's a thermal process, a high pressure process, a drying process, something to eliminate or reduce a hazard, having a routine testing that's not necessarily pathogen testing, to know that that process is consistently working the way that you want and is delivering the results that you're looking for. Next slide. So looking at this slide, and I don't know if Katie or Jen, you had planned on discussing this, but I'll talk about key hazards, and then maybe other folks can take over some of the pieces. So obviously we've talked about salmonella being kind of like key hazard number one within pet food. Mycotoxins are a concern. Katie mentioned nutrient imbalance, especially in limited ingredient diets. Those are kind of the top concerns that we see in pet food safety these days. I will say on the testing portion, rapid PCR testing continues to kind of, I think, be the industry standard. But again, it ties back to that knowing that that test method is working for your product and not just relying on this is what the industry standard is.
I'll comment on preventive controls. Having that risk assessment in place that identifies where your risks are so that you can mitigate them is very key in completing the management of these risks that we are identifying. So we talk about HACCP implementation. HACCP is typically when you find or you identify how you manage the risk at the last possible place. When we bring in preventive controls, we're saying, how can we stop it before it gets to the final place and we have to throw everything away? So identifying preventive controls upfront really helps us understand how we can make safer products that will be able to be saleable. And supply chain verification, which is subpart F of 117, is quite important. Excuse me, subpart G of 117 is quite important in this whole program.
All right.
Katie?
I think so. If I think we're good on this one, and then one of the things that we wanted to talk about as well. So we've talked about all these novel ingredients. We've talked about risks. One of the words that kept coming up is talking about quality. So defining and demonstrating quality. And so it's this question, who and what defines quality? And I know we've had really good conversations about this, because if I come at this from a pet owner's perspective, you know, quality can be the ingredients list, but if you've been in the pet industry long enough, you know that good and bad ingredients come and go based on science, hopefully, but often just based on perception. So, you know, is it about the manufacturing standards that Jen was just talking about, meeting those requirements? How does that demonstrate it on a pet food? So when the pet parent goes to make that purchase, how do they understand what a quality pet food is? Yeah, so I'll just open it up to the two of you as well and kind of re-spark this conversation.
As a consumer and a pet parent myself, to me, quality at the heart of it is, am I getting what I paid for? So is the product delivering the nutrition? Is it delivering the stability and the safety that I think that I'm entitled to ultimately as a consumer? I think that there are potentially other things, which is how does it impact quality of life? So do I want something that has like a long shelf life that makes my life easy? Do I want something that fits within my lifestyle of whether it's being a vegetarian or a vegan? Do I want something that aligns with my ethical decisions or my health decisions as well?
And I think looking back, before I became an auditor, when I worked in industry, we manufactured ingredients and we would set a specification for our ingredient and we would send that specification off to our customer, and our customer would come back and say, no, this is the specification we want. And we would work between ourselves, you know, between the company and my company to determine what the specification was going to be, what we could manufacture and what they would accept. So I think there's almost a coordination of what you can manufacture versus what a company is looking for, where you come to an agreement about what that specification is to give the quality that they're looking for.
Great. Oh, so I think we're on to our poll question now.
All right, so if you will pop up that poll question. Our poll question today is, what do you feel is the biggest challenge in your food safety quality program? Is it the cost of compliance, including third-party certifications, a lack of standardized testing protocols, Challenges with ingredient sourcing and traceability, or D, lack of clarity in maintaining documentation and records. We'll give you just a few seconds to answer the poll, and then we will look at the results. So, Katie, cue the music. So do we have results yet? So we're seeing cost of compliance, including third-party certification, is 30%, and challenges with ingredient sourcing and traceability is at 46%. Katie, Jess, does this surprise you on the ingredient sourcing and traceability?
I don't think that it surprises me too much. I mean, I think there's always concerns about food fraud, and being able to maintain a consistent supply, especially when there are limited options in the marketplace.
I would just add that, you know, so we deal a lot with manufacturers of single ingredient, and depending on what that ingredient is, that your sources, you know, if you're buying an ingredient from multiple farms, you can get variation in your ingredient quality. And that can include contaminants like microbes, heavy metals, that sort of thing. So I'm not surprised to see that being kind of the main challenge, because that is, unless you're fully vertically integrated, that may be outside of your control. And it's kind of through negotiation and setting contracts with suppliers that you would address some of those issues.
Right. And I can see cost of compliance as a second runner up there, as there still is some confusion about what's acceptable or not, and you may get multiple sets of requirements from multiple customers that you have, and you're trying to do the one best certificate to answer everyone. So we could go on to the next slide. So consumers now expect human grade standards in pet food, especially after past recalls and contamination events. So what I want to talk about is how we demonstrate food safety and quality in pet food. Because today it's not enough to say a product is safe. We need to show it through independent verification, transparency, and traceable processes. First, third-party certification. This is our external proof that we follow globally recognized food safety systems. Certifications like SQF, FSSC 22000, BRCGS, and ISO 22000 signal that we operate under strict controls, including hazard analysis and critical control points, or HACCP, and good manufacturing practices. They just aren't checkboxes. They're the building of consumer and retailer trust that you have these systems in place. Second is testing and monitoring. We regularly test ingredients and finished products for pathogens like Salmonella or Listeria, chemical residues, and nutrient accuracies to ensure every batch is safe and matches the label. We also monitor the production environment, air, water, equipment surfaces using swab tests and data loggers to verify sanitation. Importantly, many of these tests are conducted through third-party ISO 17025 accredited laboratories, adding independence and credibility to our results. Third is traceability. We maintain full transparency across the supply chain. This means we can trace any ingredient from its source all the way to the final product and even down to the specific lot number on a shelf. In the event of a recall or quality issue, this lets us act quickly and decisively. Many companies are moving towards digital traceability platforms to improve transparency and data security. And finally, documentation. Documentation ties it all together. Every test result, audit, sanitation log, corrective action, and batch record is documented, not only to satisfy auditors, but also to support continuous improvement. Having this paper or digital trail ensures we're always audit ready and helps our teams learn from past performance. In the world of auditing, we say if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And that's the objective evidence that you have to show us that you're compliant. In summary, food safety and quality are not just production activities, they're proof points. By combining independent certification, rigorous testing, real-time monitoring, transparent traceability, and disciplined documentation, we turn safety into a competitive advantage and a promise we can keep to every pet parent. Next slide, please. Pet food innovation is accelerating rapidly, driven by evolving science, nutritional trends, and consumer expectations. In this environment, quality can no longer be just a marketing message. It must be real, measurable, and provable. Risk management is essential to protect both animals and brands. And I think to say brands is equally as important as the pet, especially as regulatory scrutiny and supply chains complexity increase. Today's consumers are more informed, intentional, and value-driven than ever, demanding transparency, safety, and evidence-based claims. To truly stand out, brands must move beyond buzzwords and demonstrate science-backed credibility using data, third-party validation, and responsible innovation to build lasting trust. Next slide, please. At SGS, we support pet food brands and ingredient manufacturers with a full range of services designed to help you stay ahead in 3 significant ways. First, we offer testing and quality assurance through our ISO 17025 accredited laboratories. This includes everything from microbiological and chemical testing to food fraud detection and packaging safety. We can also support vendor assurance programs and routine ingredient testing to help you enforce strict specifications from the ground up. Second, we provide globally recognized audits and certification. Whether you are pursuing GFSI schemes like FSSC 22000, BRCGS, or SQF, or looking for specialized certifications such as non-GMO, gluten-free, or vegan-vegetarian, we're there to help you. We also offer sustainability audits like SMETA to help you meet customer and retailer expectations for responsible sourcing and transparency. And third, our regulatory and safety support services help you navigate the complex regulatory environment from FDA, CVM, and Health Canada submissions to GROS dossiers, food additive petitions, and claim substantiation. We also offer support for safety and efficacy trials, along with access to SGS DigiComply, our regulatory intelligence platform that can help you tremendously with horizon scanning. We're here to help you build consumer trust, demonstrate quality, and bring safe, compliant, and innovative products to market with confidence. Next slide, please. SGS will be at a few conferences coming up. This week right now, we're at VitaFoods in Europe. That starts today and goes through May 22nd in Barcelona. Next up is Biota America, which will be June 9th through the 11th in Vancouver. I will be at IFT First on July 13th through 16th in Chicago, and also at Supply Side Global in October the 27th through the 30th in Las Vegas. Next slide, please. We thank you for your time and attention, and now we can look to see if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you all. We do have several questions, including some pretty specific ones related to safety and microbiological contaminants and the like. But let me start by asking, so say someone is looking to introduce one of the more novel ingredients, say insect protein or something like that, into their product line. Where do they start from a safety and testing or microbiological standpoint?
I can kick this one off. So we work with clients who have novel ingredients. Sometimes it's things that are used in human food and supplements that they want to bring on the pet side. The first place to start is always looking at literature and figuring out where that ingredient exists currently with the knowledge base on the science of safety for the target species. Of course, I can't emphasize this enough. Cats and dogs are not little people. So when you have safety studies for an ingredient or dietary studies in people, that usually doesn't translate over to cats and dogs. So understanding the ingredient, both from the safety perspective, then also characterization of your specific ingredient. And that I think is a great place to start.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I think with the microbiological aspect of it, really understanding the sourcing and the production of that novel product is going to be very important. It can be helpful to bring in experts who have seen a lot in their careers, who can help highlight risks if you're uncertain about what risks might be associated with those products.
Okay.
From a quality perspective, I would just suggest making sure that who you're receiving the materials from, be sure that they have a HACCP program and GMP in place at a bare minimum.
Okay, the whole supply chain validation, certification aspect, right?
Correct.
Here's a more specific question. We were talking earlier, Jess, especially about some of the microbiological contaminants. So we hear a lot about salmonella, and FDA tends to focus on that. But you did mention Listeria monocytogenes and E. coli. I mean, how prevalent are ones like that?
I mean, prevalence depends on a variety of factors, including product type, product source, how it's manufactured, what sort of preventative controls are in place. So it's difficult to give data for kind of pet food in general. But I do think that salmonella will continue to be one of the bigger problems within pet food because of post-process contamination. Which means that the manufacturers need to spend time and effort on maintaining clean and sanitary facilities that avoid that recontamination of the food.
Right. Okay. And especially with some of the newer formats like raw, where there isn't the same kind of kill step as you would have with the more traditional formats.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with raw, it's kind of a different beast because there's limited options that you have in reducing that pathogen risk. Unfortunately, what I've seen a lot of the recalls is that the recalls are being initiated based off of regulatory agency sampling or customer complaints, which suggests to me that the programs that are in place for the manufacturer aren't catching the problem, which doesn't surprise me because finished product testing is really kind of a crisis check before the product goes out the door. That testing does not assure that the product is free of pathogens. That's done through all of those other things like your ingredient sourcing, your manufacturing processes, and then having a pathogen reduction step.
And the value of the cleaning and sanitation program, and if it's been validated as effective.
Right. Okay. It's a complex chain, isn't it? And then you were talking a few minutes ago about how prevalence just depends on so many factors, Jess. There is a question if there's a resource that defines what are acceptable pathogen loads. For example, vomit toxin below X is a safe level. So this person will have labs come back and say that, you know, their food or product has, you know, less than X, but she's never quite sure what a safe level is to interpret those results.
Sure, I mean, there are regulatory limits for some things, but not everything. So I guess then the question becomes, how are you determining what you're testing for? And then how do you build up a program in response to those results? I can't necessarily speak to all of the pet food regulations, so I'll leave that to Katie or Jen if they've got some input on that.
Generally, contaminants should be kept as low as technologically feasible. You know, I think if we were to approach that, if there's no existing standard, we'd want to look in literature, we'd want to see if there's something that could justify a particular level, but you know, that would probably be the approach to take to figure that out.
I think
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, in an absence of any sort of data, so there's no regulation, there's no published literature that suggests that something is a concern. The other thing that manufacturers could do is potentially look at their trend data. So if they're constantly sampling this, if the product is always achieving a very low level, but then all of a sudden a batch comes in with a high level, that may be something that triggers either an investigation or a rejection of that batch because it's atypical, which suggests that something has happened to that product that's made it not the quality that you were expecting.
That makes sense. What I was going to ask is, I have heard, and I can't think of them off the top of my head right now, but there are, in terms of the things that are regulated, where the level is regulated. I mean, is that through FDA? Is there a resource for people to refer to for those?
So it depends. It depends on what you're looking at. There are some contaminant levels that are listed out. Again, it's going to be species specific, but listed out in things like the AAFCO official publication. So there isn't one source. I'll say that there isn't one comprehensive source, and so you kind of have to look at it on an ingredient basis and on a potential contaminant basis.
So you have to do your research and homework.
Yeah.
This is a question about one of the specific slides. I think it may have been one that you were going over, Jess. You mentioned key hazards of managing pet food risks percentages, and salmonella was 42%, mycotoxins 18%, nutrient imbalance 15%. What were these percentages in reference to? Does that sound familiar for any of you? Sorry, I think this was fairly early on, so.
I think that could be a question that we can follow up after the.
Okay.
Yeah, because we do have references for the numbers. I just don't know the one specifically for that one.
Okay, good to know. So you mentioned communicating with consumers and especially with some of these newer proteins, for example, Jess. So someone's asked, is it possible from the manufacturer and scientific perspective to give more indicators to consumers, like a card to compare color transition from fresh to spoiled or go by smell? So it goes to that consumer education piece, I think is what the person's trying to get at is,
Yeah. There are a number of technologies, and I won't name any of them in particular, but there are a number of relatively low cost temperature monitors. So they're like stickers that you can put on cold packed products that will gradually change color over time, so there's a visual sign that that product has been temperature abused. Unfortunately, smell is really not a great indicator of quality or safety. I mean, I think it can tell you, hey, this is really, really bad, but it doesn't tell you if there's a pathogen hazard there. For example, Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli. Those can grow in products without necessarily changing the way the product looks or smells or tastes. So I think if I think about the best things that a manufacturer could possibly do is, look at those programs that help limit or eliminate risk, make sure that, you've got everything buttoned up as tight as possible. If you're looking at how long is our product good for, do some testing. There are research laboratories that you can work with that will help you define what microbiological, what nutritional, what quality aspects to do. And then you can actually test that out over time under a variety of conditions, whether that's ambient temperature or abused refrigeration. Like, you can really put these things through the ringer so that you're confident that at the end of the day, the consumer is going to get the best quality, and that helps to protect your brand.
Right. Right. Okay, well, thank you all very much. I think we will wrap up because we're several minutes past the top of the hour. Thank you to everyone who has logged in today to listen to today's webinar. Again, an on-demand recording will be made available as a video starting tomorrow. To register for upcoming webinars, view that video, or see on-demand webinars on related topics, please visit petfoodindustry.com/webinars. Please remember to take a couple minutes to answer our short survey after the webinar, the SGS, and we all really want to know what your feedback is. Thank you very much to our sponsor, SGS, for their participation today. For more information on products and services they offer, please visit www.sgs.com. And finally, a big thank you to all of our speakers for their time and insights today. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day or evening.